It's springtime. You know what that means? Allergies. Oh wait, I mean the start of baseball. It's without a doubt one of my favorite sports to watch live. And really, what's not to love about going down to the stadium, watching a game, having some beverages, and watching your favorite team lose in soul-crushing fashion? Oh, I know, sitting in traffic and paying parking fees to see the game. It might surprise you, but for a lot of MLB stadiums, it's pretty easy to get to them car-free. So let's take a look at all the MLB stadiums in the US and Canada and see which ones are the best to get to by transit. Now, if you watched my ranking of the NFL stadiums in a previous video, there's one little flaw from that I can't quite get over in that one. And it comes from one of my favorite things that I use to get data on transit and walking, and that's walk score. Unfortunately, walk score likes to really boost the score of an address, even if it's just served by some random streetcar line that just isn't as good as a normal light rail line or metro line. So along with that, I've used some of my general expertise of visiting most of these stadiums on this list to kind of help balance out that score that we get from them to kind of make a more even ranking. And just to clarify, this is not personally how I feel about the stadiums as venues for baseball, because transit is not everything for a baseball game, and I can guarantee you that some of these stadiums would not be this high on this list. Maybe I'll save that for a future video, but I know you guys are here for the urbanist content. Now enough with that, let's get into the stadium rankings. Here we have the lowest of the low. These stadiums are horrendous to even try and access without a car. Easily the worst stadium to try and access without a car is the home of the most recent World Series champions, Globe Life Park in Arlington, Texas. And if that city sounds familiar to you, it's because it's the biggest city in North America without any public transit of any kind. And there's really no good land use around the stadium. And honestly, it's really sad seeing any stadium with connection issues and zoning around it like this. There's also a few other teams that have stadiums in this tier. One of them is the new home of the Atlanta Braves, Truist Stadium. The only reason it's not second to last is because it is hypothetically possible to get there by transit, and there's some slightly better land use around the stadium, but still, Truist Stadium is so disappointing compared to their old stadium, Turner Field, which was right off of MARTA. Hey folks, as I'm editing this video, Turner Field isn't served by any MARTA lines, but it was served by multiple bus lines, and also the stadium's been repurposed for football by Georgia State. There's also Milwaukee's American Family Field and Kauffman Stadium that fall down here with the bad land use around the stadiums. However, there's actual bus lines that will get you to the stadiums, rather than just having them a good 15-minute walk from the actual stadium. These ballparks suck when you try to access them by transit, but luckily, these are the absolute worst, and everything gets better from here. So let's take a step up. These next stadiums are generally accessible by transit, but they really aren't the best for it. One common thing you'll see among many of these stadiums is that they're still surrounded by parking, but might have some slightly better zoning just depending on the stadium. But every one of these stadiums has some sort of semi-frequent transit line to them. However, most of these stadiums are only served by one line that even runs slightly frequently. In the best case, it's going to be a light rail line, but usually it's going to be some sort of bus service or some sort of bus shuttle to a metro or regional rail service. You can definitely get to these stadiums by transit, however, you usually gotta go out of your way to do it. Kind of like how if you watched this far, you should definitely hit the subscribe button, but let's take a step up to the next level. Alright, here's where we get to the stadiums where transit becomes a much better option for stadium access. These stadiums all have some form of rail transit to the stadium, whether it's a fully grade-separated LRT like in St. Louis or Cleveland, or just a standard streetcar like Detroit or Cincinnati. These stadiums also have multiple bus lines or game day express buses to the stadiums that make it easier to get to by transit. Land use, however, around these stadiums is generally better, as most of them are in or near downtown. However, some of these stadiums do have a lot of parking around them. These are the stadiums that just missed the top 10, but that doesn't mean that they're bad for transit accessibility. Most of these stadiums have heavy rail metros that run to them, or in the case of stadiums like Coors Field, it has multiple regional rail lines and LRT serving the field. These stadiums don't just see railed transit, but they also get service from multiple bus lines in the area. One of the main things that keeps these stadiums from getting in the top 10 is stadium parking and land use. Even if your stadium has decent access from a heavy rail metro, if it's surrounded by a sea of parking or highways, then that's definitely going to hurt accessibility from transit to the stadium. However, in the case of Citizens Bank Ballpark, that might actually be a pro to protect the city from crazy Philly sports fans. Coming in at 10th place, we have the home of one of the more disappointing teams of last season, and that is Petco Park, home of the San Diego Padres. Unlike the bigger city to the north of it, San Diego's Petco Park was built in the late 90s as a way to revive a more industrial part of downtown San Diego. And wow, this area has changed so much in the past 40 years. The stadium is easy to access from all three of the light rail lines that MTS operates, as well as its rapid and local bus lines. Petco Park is beloved as a baseball stadium, and mixed-use zoning and transit in the area are definitely playing an integral role for this stadium, and it's pretty easy to get to a Padres game without driving. Next up, we head to one of the powerhouses in the AL Central, and the recipient of a new stadium after the old one's roof collapsed in. Target Field, home of the Minnesota Twins, is another easy one to get to by transit. Opened in 2010, the stadium, which is in downtown Minneapolis, is served by both the green and blue Metro Transit LRT lines, as well as the silver BRT line and the North Star commuter rail. The stadium area has kind of become a bit of a transit hub, and it's very similar to Petco Park with the transit in the area. The only reason I'm giving Target Field the advantage is zoning around the stadium. Nonetheless, both stadiums are great options to try to get to by transit, but let's move into the number 8 spot. New York's replacement team for the Dodgers and Giants. The Mets, like any good team that actually plays in New York City, needs a proper connection to the subway, and just like Shea Stadium before it, the Mets' new home of Citi Field is served by the subway. Citi Field definitely doesn't have great land use around it, with parking and highways, but it is served by multiple bus lines, the LIRR Port Washington line, and a single subway line that's so good, it definitely deserves its own video. But it doesn't matter if you're a Mets fan, or just going there to get flipped off by Mr. Met himself, the proper way of getting to a game here is by transit. If you watched my video covering NFL stadiums, you might not be surprised to see this one as its next door neighbor, Lumen Field, came in first on that list. But T-Mobile Park in Seattle has all the indicators of a stadium that's great to access by transit. The stadium has easy access to Seattle's One Line, the Seattle Sounder commuter rail, the First Hill streetcar, local bus services, and in a few weeks, the Seattle 2 line as well. With Seattle currently building more transit lines throughout the city, it's only going to get better to access it by public transit. So while the Mariners may not be known as the greatest team in the MLB, it's at least easy to get to a game without needing to pay for parking. Some of you may know my favorite team, and it pains me not to put their stadium in the top 5 on this list, but I think it just shows how impressive the transit to the stadiums are above it on the list. At number 6, we have Wrigley Field on the north side of Chicago. Wrigley Field is the second oldest stadium in the MLB, and it's truly incredible to visit. I highly recommend it even if you don't like baseball. With the surrounding transit-oriented and walkable neighborhood, it's easy to access from Chicago's red and purple lines, as well as multiple CTA bus lines. It's a missed experience to not take transit here. I will say the one major downside of Wrigley's transit has to do more with the CTA than the location itself, as the CTA post-2020 has definitely taken a hit and become slightly less reliable than it was before. You'd be a fool not to take transit to Wrigley Field. Here at number 5, we have a stadium that's well known for its revival of older stadium design, but it should also be known for its great connections to public transit. Home of the Orioles, Camden Yards in Baltimore, Maryland, is just to the south of downtown Baltimore and is accessible from Maryland Area Regional Commuter, also known as MARC, the Metro Light Rail Link, which is an LRT line that provides connections to both the Metro and Amtrak service at Baltimore Penn. The stadium's also served by buses as well. Camden Yards also has some really great land use to the north of the stadium. And with the stadium basically being at a transit center, you really can't get a whole lot better, and there's no wonder why it ranks so high on the list. Coming in at our number 4 spot is Oracle Park in San Francisco. The home of the Giants has great transit service from multiple different agencies, such as Muni, with both their light rail metro and bus services, Caltrain with their hub just 2 blocks away, and multiple different ferry lines that provide connections to other parts of the bay. It's really deserving of the number 4 spot here. For the number 3 spot, we gotta take a trip to Canada Land and visit their only current baseball team. The Rogers Centre is the home of the Blue Jays, and it's an incredible location for transit, with easy access to multiple streetcar and bus lines, making it easy to get to games from nearby neighborhoods. On top of this, it's about 3 blocks away from Toronto Union Station, which provides easy access to the stadiums from the Line 1 Metro, as well as GO trains coming from the suburbs. With Toronto planning on improving transit in the metro area, it's going to get a lot easier to see the Blue Jays play just by taking transit. But do you know what's even easier to do without taking transit? Joining my Patreon, because there you can get extra content, early access to videos, your name in the credits, and more. The link is down below. But let's get to the final 2 MLB stadiums for transit. Both of these stadiums are incredibly easy to get to on public transit. Both are in the AL East, and both are massive rivals. I was debating on who I was going to give the number 2 and number 1 spot because they're both just so close. But the number 2 spot is going to have to go to Fenway Park in Boston. Home of the Red Sox, the stadium is accessible by MBTA commuter rail, MBTA bus routes, and most importantly, the MBTA Green Line. It's a solid service, and with multiple branches, it's quite extensive. However, the Green Line definitely has some reliability issues that it needs to address. As one of the nation's first electric subways, you'd be a fool to drive to Fenway Park. But wait, if Boston's getting second place, then who's in first? With service from not 1, not 2, but 3 MTA subway lines and regional rail on the Hudson, Harlem, and New Haven lines, as well as local bus service, Yankee Stadium is without a doubt the easiest MLB stadium to reach by public transit. While the zoning around the stadium isn't perfect, it really doesn't matter as the transit is just too good. It carries this stadium over all the others in the MLB. But how do you feel about this ranking? Do you think any stadium should be higher or lower? Let me know down below in the comments. And hey, if you made it this far, then be sure to like and subscribe. Here's a special thank you to everybody who helped me make this video. I also want to thank Tony Stunts and all of my other patrons who help support the channel. Want to have your name in the credits, get access to my extra videos, and get my video content earlier? Then consider checking out my Patreon. The link is down below. And while you're down there, be sure to check out my socials. I post updates and extra content there. Folks, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Your views are greatly appreciated. And as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.